Lamplight Universe presents Treasure Hunters, a Kingdom of Florida adventure. Chapter 4, Fate of the Wilder.
After a deafening silence, Coral spoke up.
I will go.
My heart sank. My dear Coral, my love, I couldn't bear the thought of losing her to the dark depths of this shadowy world, and I voiced this rather firmly. While she stubbornly objected, it was eventually determined by the group that I should go. After all, Coral was royalty, and she, and most of the rest of them, had other loved ones who cared for her deeply. I was instructed to give the rope a pull upon reaching the creature, to signal for those that lowered me to stop. Simple enough, I surmised. I wrapped the rope around my waist. Coral and Thatcher ensured it was secure, then slowly I descended, lowered gently by the train of companions who each gripped the rope. Bastian's light began to fade from view, and soon all I could feel was the humid air from beneath my feet. Bursts and bellows from the fearsome Wilder. Down I went. I sensed that my body's temperature had dropped by several degrees, for I began to shiver. Next came the smell, an odious and wretched scent of rotting fish intermingled with bad breath. While I tried not to gag, I yanked on the rope and quickly came to a stop. The Wilder was asleep just beneath my feet. I now adjusted my body so that I hung prostrate, parallel to the floor, and pulled the knife from my belt. I couldn't tell exactly what part of the beast lay before me, but I hoped that I was near its head, for that was the point at which I was to slay it with the crude blade. I took a deep, quiet breath, then plunged the blade downward until it met the thick, scale-like flesh of the Wilder. For a moment, I believed that my stroke had been successful in defeating said beast, but a moment later, I realized I was sorely mistaken. With my hands firmly gripping the knife nestled into the creature's flesh, the Wilder began to writhe and roar as it suddenly awoke. To my relief, it did not seem too interested in me, for it had apparently caught a glimpse of the light at the top of the deep void, Bastian's lantern. The beast began to slither up through the chasm, I clinging to it for dear life. The creature seemed to defy gravity as it ascended, though perhaps it was the smooth and serpentine motion that maintained its upward mobility. I took quick breaths as the cavern's narrow sides squeezed me into the creature's cold scales. Finally, we reached the top of the pit. I felt a momentary lump in my throat at the sight of my friends and their horrified expressions. Before any of us could think, the Wilder lunged at the nearest illuminated prey, one of our faithful crew members. In a single bite, the creature's maw enveloped him and made him disappear past razor-sharp teeth and down its long throat with swift deftness. While the Wilder calculated its next attack, I could now see more clearly. The initial knife wound was too far down the creature's back. I would need to make a direct incision into the Wilder's cranial region in order to put an end to it once and for all. Before I could think of my next move, the beast began to slither down the cave tunnel. My companions hastily scurried toward the darker edges of the walls, while Bastian waved the lamp, immediately garnering the creature's attention.
Hey, you! Over here! Yeah, you! Come get it!
He's a fool, I thought. I realized that the Wilder, with my weary body clinging to its own, was following Bastian, moving ever closer to the light. Then it hit me. Bastian is luring the Wilder away from our friends. He intends to make a sacrifice for all of us to escape. I couldn't bear the thought. Bastian had become a dear friend in such a short time. I had to act fast. Carefully, I shimmied along the scaly mass of the enormous reptile, pausing to regain my grip at frequent intervals. Finally, the top of the wilder's head was within reach. I took the knife in hand once again and readied for the strike. At the same time, my foe prepared to make a leap at Bastian. The timing had to be perfect. I raised my arm, then quickly brought it down, right at the spot I had eyed. An ear-splitting shriek resounded as I planted the killing blow to the wilder, narrowly sparing Bastian from certain doom. For a brief moment, the beast tried to fight back, but my blade had been sure. In a matter of seconds, its breathing ceased, and I slumped to the ground. One by one, our party reconvened, emerging from the shadows hesitantly. When I verified that the beast was indeed slain, all breathed sighs of relief. Bastian's lantern became a rallying point for us, and we gathered around it to exchange remarks of relief and rejoicing. Satisfied, loyal Thatcher assured us that our mission was complete. We would now return briefly to the camp of the Oscura before leaving that dark rock for good. I, for one, was incredibly relieved to leave that shadowy place, though Thatcher found it difficult to say goodbye to the kind Oscura who had welcomed him into their hospitable tribe. Though it was nearly night when we departed that place, we relished in the final moments of the sun's tangerine rays as we gathered on deck to determine our course. Jeanmarc, clutching his newly returned locket, was eager to return home. But it was Coral who reminded us that one of my former crewmates might still be out there somewhere, waiting to be rescued. "Caesar," I reminded them, "it's possible he's still alive. After all, the three of us survived the wreck." Ginger interjected.
"Thatcher, you said he drifted away. Which way?"
"South,"
he answered.
"Further south. I think there are more islands."
It was settled without much debate. Again, we would rest for the night and resume our journey south at first light. While we settled into our places of rest, I noticed that Coral perched her arms across the railing on the stern, staring off into the distance. "What is it, dear?" I asked gently as I approached. The princess snapped out of some reverie and turned to me.
"It's nothing,"
she muttered, then said,
"I was just thinking about the mask. How curious it is. I wonder how exactly its magic works."
In the hurry to seek my friends, I'd nearly forgotten about our original quest and the strange vision I'd beheld through the glass eyes of the Mask of Memories. "I suppose you have to be in or near a place to be able to see the memories of it," I suggested, "but there's much I don't know about it. You should get some rest, Coral. We've a long day ahead of us." Coral nodded and said she'd retire to the cabin in a moment, so I said goodnight and allowed her some solitude while I returned to my sleeping arrangements with the others. The swaying of a ship on the water never ceased to put me immediately to sleep, and this night was no different. I rested even easier still knowing that we'd managed to rescue two of my dear former crewmates, who were nestled securely at either side of me. The next morning, we awoke with a hearty breakfast aboard the ship, consisting of various rations a crewmate had procured on some of our island voyages, as well as the remaining morsels of the less perishable delicacies that we'd brought along from the palace. While we ate, Bastian steered the ship south, slipping into the narrow current that guided us toward the next island. When it came into view, it appeared as any average island off the coast of Florida, a tiny patch of sand and mangled greenery that grew less blurry as we neared. The waters around it were crystal clear, glistening a vibrant teal in the rising sunbeams, while the tops of densely packed mangrove trees fluttered in the breeze. This tropical isle was truly a sight for sore eyes after the nearly half day spent in the complete and utter darkness of the Island of Shadows. As was our tradition by now, Our party piled into the rowboat and paddled ashore. The sand was soft and white like sugar, enamoring us as we fastened our boat and approached the tree line to begin the search for Caesar. At one point, I glanced behind me to ensure all members of our party were together. When I turned back to the tree line, it appeared as if the trees had moved, changed their position or shape. I quickly shrugged it off, blaming this on one of those quirky tricks of the mind that occur from time to time, and guided my friends into the thicket. There was no discernible path, so our expedition moved slowly through the mess of branches and trunks and leaves. The forest floor was loose, moist earth, barely caked together and swarming with low-lying flies. It was hard work to prevent our boots from getting stuck in place, but we continued moving. When we could no longer see or hear the lapping of the waves upon the pristine shore, a buzzing sound appeared in my ear. I began to swat at the noise, thinking it was some massive insect. To my surprise, as I looked closer, however, I was intrigued to discover that this was another curious creature, which was more human in appearance than a fly. The being's body was small, no more than a foot in height, and resembled a person, but its skin was a mottled green. It was covered in what I presumed were garments and adornments, fashioned of bits of palmetto leaves, a skirt, a crown, and the like. While I inspected it closer, the sprite zipped away, joining what I now saw was a small swarm of similar beings congregating in a clump of leaves. When I returned my gaze to the makeshift path, I was surprised to see the trees begin to contort, stretching high above me as if I viewed them through a funhouse mirror. "Are you seeing this?" I asked of Bastian, who walked near me.
Keep your eyes on the path.
Bastian instructed, thrashing at a branch with his blade.
Bad luck, those palmetto sprites. Play tricks on unsuspecting wanderers.
Palmetto sprites. So this apparition was a figment of some strange magic by those little green creatures? Curious. I deemed that we should keep our distance from these meddlesome creatures as much as we were able. Sure enough, Bastian's wisdom was apt. With our eyes fixed on the muddy ground ahead of us, the trees around us soon returned to their normal appearance. We walked a bit further, toward the center of the island, until we came upon a small clearing surrounded by thick, knobby mangroves. Suddenly, Ginger let out a gasp. We looked to see what was the matter and followed her gaze to a foreboding sight. A skeleton tangled in the mangrove roots. At first, I hesitated. Then, cautiously, I moved closer to inspect the bones. By the looks of it, this unfortunate soul had been rotting here for weeks. But what had caused his or her demise? Surely not starvation, for this island was abundant with plants and birds. These thoughts vanished as my eyes caught glimpse of the skeleton's clenched fist. I stooped and, with some struggle, cracked apart the fingers to see what was inside. I withdrew a smooth stone artifact, a round charm not unlike a medallion in size and shape. As I flipped it over, I discovered the engraving of a fish and feathers on the item's rough opposite side.
That's the symbol of Palafox,
Coral noted.
one of the other royal families that ruled this kingdom. Their palace stands on the western coast, though. I wonder what this is doing all the way out here.
This gave me an idea. The Mask of Memories. Perhaps it could recall the steps that led it to this unfortunate skeleton's present fate. The others agreed that it was worth a try and carefully unwrapped the mask from its shroud. As I was the only one who had used it before, it was determined that I would be the wearer once more. I strapped the ancient mask to my face and clutched the stonefish charm in my fist. As before, the glass eye pieces were at first a milky translucent color that made it difficult to see anything clearly. But soon this gave way to a crisp, lifelike view of the mangrove jungle before me. My attention was directed to the skeleton. To my surprise, I watched as my hands placed the stone charm back into its fingers, and my companions walked backwards out of the clearing. Rather quickly, I might add. What happened next, when they'd gone, was even more curious. The movement of the tiny specks of sun peeking through the canopy began to speed, and it was as if several days occurred in seconds. The more surprising thing, however, was the skeleton. As the daylight and moonlight flickered hastily, the skeleton slowly began to regain its substance, forming for a moment a hideous corpse, and then, shortly thereafter, a fully formed human woman. I had little time to consider this, for after a brief moment in which a mangrove root wrapped and unwrapped itself around her limbs, the woman opened her eyes and began to hurry backwards out of the clearing. At this point, the mask enabled me to follow her path, watching as she nervously clutched the stone fish charm in her hand. When we reached the beach, she continued to step into the water, still moving with her back toward the direction in which she was headed. It was at this moment that I realized I had been watching a history unfold in reverse, starting with the moment in which we first came upon the poor woman. Absolutely curious, I marveled at the strange magic of this place and the Mask of Memories. It was exceedingly curious given the fact that my prior experience with the mask had played out in real time and in the proper direction. As if sensing this, the eye holes of the mask suddenly became blurry and fogged again, but only for a brief moment. When they were clear once more, I found myself on the deck of a ship out at sea. Standing beside me was the woman from the island, still grasping the charm. It became apparent to me that this was some sort of pirate vessel, though the garb of all on board was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I surmised this was connected to the western region Coral had described moments earlier. Though their voices were garbled due to the constraints of the mask, I discerned that they were preparing for some sort of raid on an approaching vessel. To my relief, this scene now occurred in the proper direction in which time is supposed to move, forward. The vessel on the horizon seemed familiar. It took me a moment to figure it out, but soon I realized that this was the ship of the fearsome Captain Zinka, an arch-enemy that, in our proper timeline, possessed something of great value to my Coral: the Gem of Might. I intuited that the charm-holding woman and her own captain intended to secure this powerful artifact for themselves. This was an ambush. As the raid began, the pace of the scene accelerated once more, jumping forward in time every few seconds so that I only caught glimpses of the ensuing skirmish. The pirates storming aboard Zinka's ship, the captain grappling with Zinka over the gem, the charm woman left on a flaming vessel, unable to fit in a small rowboat, the captain rowing to the mainland, gem in hand, Zinka's ship vanishing. Then, last of all, the woman clinging to her charm in some rigging as she drifted to the island where we found her. The scene turned to black and the eyes of the mask became milky again. I took it from my head, sweating, and shared what I had seen with the others. Ginger was the first to seek clarity.
So this woman, this skeleton, was with the pirate captain from Palafox? He took the gem from Zinka?
I nodded. If the mask is to be trusted, yes. Over the next few moments, we discussed whether our journey should take us across the mainland to its western coast. Once we had made our best efforts to find Caesar, of course. As these events transpired, the above-ground roots of the mangrove trees around us began to creep their way toward our feet. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, these living roots wound their way around our ankles, tightening ever so gradually as to keep us unaware of their otherworldly activity. Then, all at once it seemed, the plants grew tighter, locking our feet in place. Ginger cried out.
It's another trick of the Palmetto sprites.
No, I eked out, trying to loosen the grip of the roots at my feet. This is something else entirely. This is no trick. I immediately recalled the brief moment in the memory showed to me by the mask, in which the roots had coiled around the pirate woman. The roots are what put an end to her life, what trapped her here. While we pulled at the tough vine-like roots, Bastian whipped out a knife with which he began to saw at the tendrils around his own ankles. With a little work, he cut himself free, though another pair of roots snaked toward him. Though not all of us carried weapons of the same nature, many of us began to try to emulate Bastian's actions with whatever tools we had at our disposal. However, the roots continued their ascent up our legs, binding still more of our bodies, and with each successive loop, they grew tighter. Bastian worked his way toward the nearest ally and began to cut them free.
Run,
he would tell them, for if they remained in place, they would surely be swallowed up by another ravenous root. Jeanmarc and Thatcher were freed, followed by Ginger. All that remained were Coral, me, and a crewman who was nearly up to his neck in roots. Coral managed to gain access to a small blade she kept on her person, which aided in her eventual liberty. In a flurry, she whisked herself over to the crewman while Bastian hacked at my bindings. The roots wrapped their way up to the crewman's chest, then began to tighten around his neck. He screamed until the tendrils were too tight to allow for the passage of such air. Bastian sliced the last bits of plant matter that set me free and ushered me off toward the others, but I couldn't leave Coral and our man behind. I was followed by Bastian, and we arrived at Coral's side quickly, but we were too late. The roots had fully covered our faithful crewman, and now that the rest of us were free and out of reach, the remaining roots joined the initial shoots that had immobilized him, and added an even thicker barrier between us and the man. He was lost. We all knew it, but we couldn't stay. With great reluctance, I pulled Coral away in tears, and we hurried off with the others. We arrived at the rowboat out of breath, but piled in and hastily returned to the ship. All of us were silent, paying our respects to our fallen companion. We had now lost some of our best men. Was it worth it to continue and try to save another life that might not even be out there? This was something with which we all had to grapple as we quietly prepared our supper, then scattered off to bed. That night, there were no sweet dreams to be had.
Treasure Hunters, a Kingdom of Florida adventure, is a production of Lamplight Universe, based on the Kingdom of Florida novels by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Treasure Hunters is written and produced by Taylor Thomas Smythe. Starring Femi Kozlowski as Coral, Ben Tidwell as Thatcher, Jedidiah Montalvo as Jeanmarc, Comfort Olugbuyi as Ginger, Ben-Oni Francois as Bastian, and Taylor Thomas Smythe as Jessie. Narrated by Nicole Johnson. Additional voices provided by Peter Goepfrich and Taylor Thomas Smythe. For more adventures, visit kingdomofflorida.com.